Before we begin tonight's slow story, I invite you to pause, to let your body soften, to let your breath deepen, and to allow the world around you to quiet down just a little. You've done enough today. Now it's time to rest, to unwind from the noise, to float gently into a slower rhythm. Take a deep breath in and let it go. Notice how your shoulders ease just a bit, how your fingers grow still, how the muscles behind your eyes soften with every blink. You're safe here, you're welcome here, and you don't have to do anything but listen. If you enjoy these gentle bedtime stories, made to help you fall asleep or simply slow down, feel free to subscribe to Fusion Ha. There's a whole playlist of relaxing stories on the channel waiting for you, all told in the same calm, cozy way. No pressure, just a quiet invitation for stillness, for comfort, for sleep. Now, let the sound of my voice fade into the background. Let each word arrive like a soft breath on your skin. Let your thoughts drift like leaves floating on water. You don't need to stay awake for the whole story. You're not here to learn or remember. You're here to let go. Let go of the clock. Let go of the lists. Let go of the weight you've been carrying all day. This is your time now. A moment made just for you. To slow down, to breathe, to drift. And as you settle in, let your mind open gently, like a door creaking open in a quiet house. Let the rest of the world fall away. You're not in a rush. You're not behind. You're exactly where you need to be. Your story is about to begin. But first, just rest here with me in this stillness. Let the hush of evening wrap around you. Let the gentle pace of the story carry you. And when you're ready, we'll begin. Long before the Globe Theater rose from the wooden timbers of a dismantled playhouse, before the crowds gathered by candlelight and the groundlings jostled for a place to stand, London was already a city alive with sound. The clatter of horse hooves, the slap of waves against the Thames, the cry of market sellers, and the murmured gossip of a population growing faster than its walls could contain. It was the late 1500s, Elizabethan London, and the city was teetering on the edge of transformation. At the heart of this restless capital was the river. The Thames divided London into two distinct halves, not just geographically, but culturally and legally. On the north bank stood the City of London, tightly wound in its medieval constraints, home to merchants, livery companies, guilds, and a great many rules. Morality was legislated, behavior monitored, theater, especially the bawdier sort, was frowned upon or outright banned. But across the water, on the south bank, the bankside, it was another world. Here, rules relaxed. Liberties, in both the legal and cultural sense, were granted. The area wasn't lawless, but it was looser, freer. It was the district of bear-baiting pits, cockfights, taverns, and brothels. And gradually, it became the beating heart of entertainment in a city that desperately craved escape. Before the Globe, there had been theaters in London, but they were mostly wooden structures tucked into back streets or temporarily assembled on rented land. The theater, built in 1576 by James Burbage in Shoreditch, was the first permanent structure dedicated to public performance in England, and it changed everything. It drew crowds from all classes. Aristocrats mingled cautiously with tradesmen and apprentices. The demand was clear. London didn't just enjoy theater, it was hungry for it. William Shakespeare, still a rising figure at the time, soon found himself deeply entangled in this theatrical revolution. He wasn't alone. There were rival playwrights, Christopher Marlowe, Ben Jonson, Thomas Kidd. There were acting troupes, each with their own loyal followings. Theaters competed for audiences, and with the rise of patronage, noble families began sponsoring actors and writers, giving them legitimacy and protection. But even as the popularity of theater surged, its place in London's cultural structure remained precarious. Authorities on the North Side, particularly the Puritan-leaning city leaders, viewed the theater with suspicion. It gathered crowds. It encouraged idleness. It could be a cover for sedition or immorality. Performances were occasionally shut down. Companies were forced to relocate. By 1598, the Burbage family, still central to the story, had lost their lease on the theater. The landlord refused to renew. It seemed like the end, but the story took a bold, even theatrical turn. Under the cover of night, members of the acting company, including the Burbages and possibly Shakespeare himself, dismantled the building. Beam by beam, they carted the timber across the frozen Thames. It was an audacious act, half protest, half preservation. They weren't letting the theater die. They were moving it. The timber was stored through the winter, and then, in the spring of 1599, on a patch of land in Bankside, a new theater began to rise. This would not be a hidden stage. It would not bow to city authorities. It would be open, ambitious, unmistakable. It would be round. It would be called the Globe. Its construction was part architectural innovation, part act of defiance. Built from the bones of the old theater, the Globe was designed for scale and spectacle. It could hold up to 3,000 people, an enormous number, in an age when cities were still relatively small, and most public spaces were intimate. It was open air, with 3 tiers of galleries encircling a central yard where the poorest patrons, known as groundlings, stood. The stage jutted out into the crowd, allowing actors to be surrounded on 3 sides. A trapdoor allowed for sudden entrances and exits. A small balcony overhead became Juliet's window, or the battlements of Elsinore, or the heights of a looming battlefield. There were no curtains, no lighting rigs, no microphones. Everything was built around voice, presence, and imagination. The opening play is believed to have been Julius Caesar, a fitting choice, a tale of ambition, betrayal, political intrigue, played in a theater born from ambition, built during uncertainty, and launched into a city teeming with tension and possibility. From its first days, the globe was a magnet. People came from across London, by foot, by horse, and especially by boat. The Thames was the city's great highway, and watermen earned a tidy living, ferrying theater-goers back and forth. The Southwark bridges didn't yet exist. To go to the globe was to cross a threshold, geographically, morally, imaginatively, and people did, in droves. They came for the stories, yes, for the tragedies and comedies, the romances and bloodshed, but they also came for something else, a glimpse of a world beyond their own. For a few pennies, a butcher's apprentice could hear royal intrigue. A maidservant could see queens weep. A merchant could laugh at drunken knights, mourn noble princes, or reflect on the nature of power and time. And there, always, at the heart of it, was Shakespeare, not always on stage, not always named, but always shaping the words, the pace, the flow. He was writing Hamlet, As You Like It, Othello, and King Lear in the years the globe was at its most active. He wasn't just building a legacy, he was building the very language in which the city would dream of itself. The globe became more than a theater. It became a mirror for London. Its plays reflected the anxieties and ambitions of a population living in uncertain times, a queen without an heir, religious divisions simmering just beneath the surface, the rise of science, the fear of witches, the changing seasons of politics, and within this turbulence, the globe offered space, not necessarily safety, but space to think, to imagine, to laugh, to weep. By 1600, it had become a fixture. Vendors outside sold snacks, hazelnuts, dried fruit, ale. Pickpockets roamed the crowd. Announcements were made by trumpet. There was no printed program, no assigned seats for most. People jostled, murmured, shouted approval or displeasure. It was theater in its rawest, most communal form. But despite the apparent chaos, the globe was shaping something profound, a shared cultural literacy. When Londoners left the globe, they didn't just talk about the sword fights or the kisses. They quoted soliloquies. They debated motivations. They repeated lines. Language began to bend around these plays. Phrases like, the world's mine oyster, in a pickle, break the ice, and wild goose chase, all first spoken here, slipped into daily speech. And thus, the globe didn't just entertain London, it changed how Londoners spoke, how they thought, how they related to one another. To understand how the globe shaped London, one must step not only through history, but into the experience itself. What was it like to be there on an ordinary afternoon, as the theater gates opened and the performance began. What did it smell like? What sounds filled the air? Who were the people arriving? And what were they hoping to find? It's easy to romanticize the globe as a hallowed hall of genius, where Shakespeare's every word was delivered with reverence. But in truth, the theater was messy, loud, unpredictable, and wonderfully alive. The Globe Theater typically opened its doors around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. There were no evening performances, artificial lighting was non-existent, and the open roof demanded daylight. Actors relied on the sun, and the audience squinted through it. The day began with the sounds of the bankside already buzzing, riverboats knocking against their moorings, sellers crying out fish prices, the clink of tavern mugs nearby. On the dirt paths leading to the theater, groups arrived in waves. Some came in silks and velvet, clutching perfumed kerchiefs. Others came barefoot, coin tucked deep in a pocket, laughing already. Entry to the Globe wasn't expensive. For a single penny, about a third of a day's wages for a laborer, one could gain access to the yard. This meant standing room only, no cover, shoulder to shoulder with other groundlings, exposed to both the elements and the elbows of fellow fans. But for many, it was the preferred way to watch. There was something raw about standing in the pit, so close to the stage you could see the sweat bead on an actor's brow, feel the stomp of their boots. Shakespeare wrote with this crowd in mind, with punchlines and wordplay that landed like thrown stones, and monologues that pulled in the silent attention of even the rowdiest apprentice. For a bit more money, 2 or 3 pence, patrons could ascend to the galleries. There, they might rent a cushion, sit in the shade, perhaps even lean out with a better view of the actors' entrances from the stage's tiring house, the backstage area behind the doors. And then there were the most expensive seats of all, the Lord's rooms. These overlooked the stage from the sides and back, not always ideal for viewing, but perfect for being seen. Social standing was, after all, often performed just as loudly as the play itself. The stage itself jutted out into the yard like a tongue. It was roughly rectangular, about 43 feet wide, and around 27 feet deep. There was a trap door for surprising exits and demonic ascents. Above, a small balcony offered space for scenes requiring height, Juliet's famous window, or the battlements of Macbeth's castle. Behind the stage stood the tiring house, 3-level structure with doors for entrances and exits, a central curtain, and, above all, the heavens. This was the name given to the ornate roof that projected over part of the stage, painted with stars and signs of the zodiac. It served both artistic and practical purposes. It provided shelter for actors in sudden rain. It allowed for props and effects, ropes for flying gods or ghosts, a winch for unexpected appearances. Atop the Globe's roof flew a flag, a simple marker to signal that a performance was happening that day. From across the Thames, on the north bank, people could look up and see it waving, A red flag meant a history play, a white flag, comedy, and black, tragedy. The audience inside was no passive congregation. They did not sit quietly in reverent hush. They cheered, groaned, booed, and gasped. They whistled approval, they heckled, and if bored, they talked, ate, flirted, or simply wandered out to the ale stand nearby. Vendors sold beer, apples, hazelnuts, and sometimes stronger drink. It was noisy. It smelled of sweat, earth, roasted nuts, and the heavy perfume of those who could afford it. Some brought dogs, others brought complaints. Yet, when the actors stepped onto the stage and the performance began, the chaos coalesced. The crowd hushed. The words, carefully written, energetically delivered, found their way into ears tuned for drama. This wasn't just Shakespeare recited, it was Shakespeare lived. He knew his crowd. He knew when to add a lewd pun, a sudden murder, a ghost, or a joke about flatulence. But he also knew when to slow the rhythm, to give a prince space to ponder life and death, to let a daughter beg her father for understanding, because while the globe was raucous, it was also deeply human. Even the staging reflected this. There were no elaborate sets, no painted backdrops or realistic props. A single tree branch might signal a forest. A piece of cloth draped over a stool might become a throne. The words did the work, and the actors, they worked, memorizing thousands of lines from multiple plays performed in weekly rotation. No mics, no second takes. They relied on voice projection, posture, and instinct. They had to hold the audience, a crowd not afraid to leave or shout back if the story faltered. Costumes were more elaborate than sets, often donated or second-hand noble clothing, rich with embroidery or color, used to signify rank or status. Cross-dressing was common. Women weren't allowed on stage, so men and boys played all roles, from Juliet to Lady Macbeth. This was normal to audiences then, and actors trained in the subtleties of posture and tone to differentiate characters. Each performance was a balancing act. Weather could shift mid-soliloquy. A heckler might call out during a tense scene. A rainstorm might soak the groundlings while the galleries remained dry. But the show went on, not because of stubbornness, but because the theater lived in the tension between chaos and control. And outside the theater, its influence was growing. Street plays and performances began borrowing language from Globe productions. Poets mimicked Shakespeare's cadences. Even sermons from pulpits began to carry the weight of rhetorical flourish, aware that their audiences had heard Hamlet the week before. It wasn't just language either. Ideas seeded in the globe about identity, power, love, madness, filtered into public conversation. People debated plots over dinner. Students quoted lines in taverns. Merchants tried to outwit each other with lines from Falstaff or Petruchio. The globe was not elite, it was communal, a shared cultural engine running in full view of the city. And when a new play premiered, the streets buzzed with speculation. Would it be as moving as Romeo and Juliet, as brutal as Titus Andronicus, as clever as Twelfth Night? Each time the trumpet sounded and the first actor stepped forward, London leaned in. Theater has always walked a fine line between entertainment and provocation. In the streets of Elizabethan London, this line often blurred, and nowhere more powerfully than at the Globe. The Globe wasn't just a place for lovers' quarrels and comic relief. It was a venue where power, identity, corruption, loyalty, and resistance were explored openly, sometimes dangerously so. In front of thousands, the audience laughed and gasped. Yes, but they also listened. And in a city where literacy was still limited and newspapers did not yet exist, a play could reach hearts and minds more quickly than any royal decree. By the late 1500s, England was anxious. Queen Elizabeth, I had no heir. Religious divisions festered under the surface. A Protestant monarchy ruling over a population still dotted with secret Catholic loyalties. The wounds of civil war and political upheaval had not entirely healed, and around it all hung questions that no one dared ask directly. What makes a good ruler? Who truly holds power? What happens when the crown is worn by the wrong person? Shakespeare understood these tensions deeply. He wrapped them in stories from other lands: Rome, Denmark, ancient Britain, but the references were rarely lost on his audience. Julius Caesar, staged early in the Globe's life, spoke directly to the fear of political instability. Its themes of conspiracy, betrayal, and mob mentality were all too familiar to Elizabethan crowds. The assassination of a leader on stage, the debate over who should succeed them, it was thrilling and it was risky. But Shakespeare didn't just reflect politics, he dissected it. He made the audience consider not just who had power, but why they had it, and what they did with it. In Macbeth, he questioned ambition. In King Lear, he explored madness and legacy. In Richard II, he delivered one of the boldest examinations of royal vulnerability, portraying a king who loses his crown not through war, but through personal failure. The Globe, with its open design and echoing acoustics, became the perfect amplifier for these questions. There was no fourth wall in those days. Actors spoke directly to the crowd. Monologues were confessions, arguments, invitations. When Hamlet asked, to be or not to be, it wasn't rhetorical. He was asking them, the butchers, the bakers, the clerks, and the noblemen in the seats above. He was saying, here is my dilemma. What would you do? And they responded, not always with words, but with silence, with murmurs, with applause or murmured protest. Theaters had to tread carefully, however. The master of the revels, an official, censor appointed by the monarchy, had the power to approve or shut down performances. Scripts were often reviewed in advance. Certain topics were off limits. You couldn't portray current monarchs directly. You couldn't incite rebellion. You couldn't question the legitimacy of the throne. And yet, clever playwrights found ways around this by setting plays in distant times or imagined lands. They created buffers. Elizabethan audiences were sharp. They recognized the parallels. A Roman Senate squabbling over leadership might just as easily reflect Parliament. A Scottish Thane, consumed by ambition, might mirror the noble families circling the Queen. The globe, then, became a kind of safe space for dangerous ideas, made safe only by the thin veil of fiction. And this fiction had consequences. In 1601, just before the failed rebellion led by Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, supporters of the rebellion paid Shakespeare's company to perform Richard II, a play about a monarch deposed by his own people. They hoped the imagery would stir the crowd. It didn't work. The rebellion failed. But the choice of play raised royal eyebrows. Queen Elizabeth is said to have remarked, "I am Richard II. Know ye not that?" She knew. Everyone knew. Theater, for all its pageantry, was also a mirror, and sometimes a magnifying glass. But the globe didn't just challenge authority, it humanized it. Royal characters in Shakespeare's plays were rarely flat. They wrestled with doubt. They loved, feared, wept. They made mistakes. Audiences began to see rulers not as divine or distant, but as flawed people in impossible positions. This, too, shaped London's culture, because when people see their leaders as human, they begin to expect more from them, more honesty, more accountability. The Globe helped cultivate a political awareness in the public, not overt, but lingering. It also raised questions about identity. In an era when class boundaries were rigid, the theater was one of the few spaces where everyone, rich and poor, shared the same experience. They might not sit in the same section, but they heard the same lines. They laughed at the same jokes. They were swept up in the same drama. And on stage, roles shifted constantly. Kings were played by commoners. Men played women. Fools spoke truth. Servants outwitted nobles. The Globe taught its audience that identity was not fixed. It was performed in a city where upward mobility was rare and social roles were tightly prescribed. This was a radical idea. It whispered, "You are not only what society says you are. You can become something more." In time, this shaped the city's imagination. London began to see itself not as a hierarchy of stations, but as a stage of roles, where wit, skill, and performance could change your fate. This was particularly powerful for the growing class of apprentices, students, and tradesmen, men and some women, through proxy, who attended the Globe not just for entertainment, but for education. They memorized speeches. They quoted them in conversation. They copied gestures. learned rhetoric, practiced charisma. The Globe wasn't just a theater, it was a school of self-invention. Even beyond politics and identity, the theater offered a space for shared emotional experiences. When Ophelia drowned, when Mercutio died, when Cleopatra fell, people cried together. In a world without cinemas, television, or novels, this was where people practiced feeling. It made them softer, more empathetic, more connected, and in a city prone to suspicion, division, and fear, that mattered. The Globe, in many ways, softened the edges of London. It invited conversation. It encouraged imagination. It built a city not just of trade and law, but of thought. By the early 1600s, the Globe Theatre was more than just a building. It was part of the fabric of the city. The Globe wasn't the only theatre in London, of course. Others like the Rose, the Swan, and later the Blackfriars had their place in the city's vibrant cultural life, but none carried quite the same mythic weight. The Globe was the beating heart, a place where Shakespeare's greatest works breathed their first breath, where thousands gathered each week to laugh, cry, cheer, and think. But like many of London's most cherished spaces, the Globe was always fragile. It stood on the south bank of the Thames, built from timber carried across the frozen river, exposed to the wind and rain. Its thatched roof, a beautiful and functional nod to medieval building practices, was a vulnerability in a city known for its unpredictable weather and tight quarters. And on a summer afternoon in 1613, during a performance of Henry VIII, that vulnerability turned to disaster. The day was warm and crowded. Henry VIII, subtitled All Is True, was a collaboration between Shakespeare and his fellow playwright John Fletcher. It was a spectacle-heavy play, full of courtly pomp, ceremonial entrances, and dramatic effects. On that afternoon, a Mima cannon was to be fired during one such scene, a theatrical flourish meant to evoke the grandeur of a Tudor court. It wasn't a real cannon, of course, but a stage device, more flash and bang than firepower. Still, the effect was real enough. The cannon misfired. A spark leapt skyward and landed on the thatched roof. Within minutes, flame caught. At first, some in the audience thought it was part of the show, another clever trick of the Globe's design. But quickly, smoke thickened, embers fell, panic spread. Eyewitness accounts describe a blaze that consumed the theater rapidly. The open roof fed the fire with air. The dry summer timbers offered fuel. Within an hour, the theater was gone, reduced to blackened posts, collapsing galleries, and smoldering ash. Miraculously, no lives were lost. The only recorded injury was a man whose breeches caught fire, quickly extinguished with a bottle of ale. But for the city, and for the community that had built its stories inside those walls, it was a profound loss. Word spread quickly. The Globe had burned. People stood on the north bank, and watched smoke trail into the sky. Riverboats paused midstream. Children clutched the hands of parents. Performers wept silently, watching years of memory crumble. It wasn't just a stage that had vanished. It was a cultural epicenter, a place where the city had gathered to imagine itself. For many, the loss felt personal. They remembered their first time standing in the yard, craning their necks for a better view. They remembered laughing until they ached, or wiping a tear after a character's death, or quoting a line the next day at the market, or workshop, or home. The globe wasn't simply a location, it was lived experience, and now it was gone. But the people who had built it were not ones to give up easily. Within days, the company, then known as the King's Men, under royal patronage, resolved to rebuild. They raised funds, they salvaged what they could, and they planned a second globe, stronger, safer, grander. In less than a year, the new globe rose on the same site. Its walls were stouter, its roof was tiled, not thatched. Its galleries were reinforced, and by June 1614, it reopened, a phoenix rising from its own soot. The rebuilding was more than architectural, it was symbolic. It showed Londoners that their stories mattered, that theater could endure hardship, that art was not a luxury, it was a necessity. And yet, something had changed. The fire had marked the end of a certain innocence. The first globe had been born of wild ambition, carried across a frozen river by men risking everything. It had been built with second-hand timber, fastened with hope and urgency. Its atmosphere had been rowdy, electric, immediate. The second globe was wiser, more deliberate, perhaps more secure, but not quite as wild. Still, the spirit remained. Shakespeare, nearing the end of his career, returned to see his work staged in the new space. He died in 1616, just 2 years later, his legacy firmly rooted in the walls he had helped raise. And for a time, the globe continued. But the fire had been the first sign of impermanence. The second, more final, would come in 1642. That year, amid rising political tension and the English Civil War, the Puritan-led Parliament closed all theaters. Plays were considered immoral, a distraction from godly living. The globe, along with every other stage in London, fell silent. For 2 years, it stood unused, and then, in 1644, it was demolished. The timbers were sold, the stage was pulled apart, the foundation filled in. A row of houses eventually replaced it, and just like that, the globe was gone. Not by fire this time, but by decree. Not a spectacle, but a quiet erasure. For over 350 years, the globe existed only in memory, its location forgotten by many, its shape guessed at, its impact reduced to footnotes and fragments. But London remembered, not in speeches, but in how the city thought, spoke, dreamed, in the way a line from Hamlet could still stir emotion, in the way school children recited Shakespeare in dusty classrooms, in the way every aspiring actor still looked to the bard for guidance. The globe had vanished physically, but it lived on culturally. It had burned, yes. It had been razed, yes. But it had shaped something permanent, a belief that art could speak to everyone. And though it would be centuries before it stood again, the seed had already taken root. Theater in London would survive. It would move indoors, into candlelit spaces. It would evolve into restoration drama, into Victorian melodrama, into West End musicals. But it all began in a wooden O, open to the sky. For over 3 centuries, the Globe Theatre lived on only in ink and memory. Its wooden walls were long gone, its stage silenced, its exact location buried beneath later developments, shrouded by shifting street names and forgotten stories. But something lingered, not just in the words of Shakespeare's plays, but in the imagination of those who studied them. Generations of actors, scholars, and curious Londoners wondered what it must have been like to stand in that open-air amphitheater, to be among the groundlings jostling for a better view, to hear lines that would one day become immortal echo across unamplified air. But no one had seen it for real since the mid-1600s, and for the longest time, it seemed no one ever would again, until an American stepped forward and decided the story wasn't over. His name was Sam Wanamaker. Born in Chicago in 1919, Wanamaker was an actor, director, and producer who had long held a deep admiration for Shakespeare. Like many, he had studied the bard's works and marveled at the enduring power of the plays. But unlike most, he was deeply disturbed to discover, during a visit to London in 1949, that there was no proper memorial to the original Globe Theatre. He had expected, perhaps, a plaque, or ruins, or something. Instead, he found nothing. Worse, the location of the original theater was in dispute. Bankside, once the rowdy, vibrant home of Elizabethan theater, was now a clutter of warehouses, factories, and forgotten riverside lanes. For Wanamaker, this was not just disappointing, it was unacceptable. He began to ask questions. He scoured maps and records. He visited scholars. And slowly, a vision formed. What if the Globe could be rebuilt? Not just in tribute, not as a themed tourist stop, but as a working theater, open to the sky, designed as authentically as possible, staging the plays as they were once performed. It was an ambitious dream. At the time, post-war London was still rebuilding itself. There were pressing issues: housing, transportation, economy. The idea of reconstructing a 16th century theater on prime riverside land seemed to many frivolous. But Wanamaker wouldn't let it go. He founded the Shakespeare Globe Trust in 1970, a charitable organization dedicated to researching, funding, and eventually reconstructing the Globe Theatre near its original site. The early years were difficult. Money was tight. Planning permission was complex. Historical records were limited, and Wanamaker, being American, sometimes faced skepticism from British institutions, reluctant to hand over the reins of one of their cultural cornerstones. But slowly, steadily, the project gained traction. Archaeologists helped determine the original globe's layout and dimensions. Historians contributed insights into construction methods and stagecraft. Craftspeople were consulted how to work with green oak, how to thatch a roof, how to recreate Elizabethan joinery without using modern nails or industrial fastenings. By the early 1980s, public support was growing. Donors came forward. Volunteers offered time and expertise. School children sent letters and pennies. Actors, including prominent names from the Royal Shakespeare Company and the West End, lent their voices in support, but the process remained slow. Years passed. Permissions were delayed, costs mounted, and then, in December 1993, Sam Wanamaker died, never seeing his dream fully realized. It could have ended there, but it didn't. His vision had taken root, not just as a personal mission, but as a collective promise. The team he had built pressed forward, determined to see it through. And in 1997, 4 years after Wanamaker's death, Shakespeare's Globe Theatre reopened. Built just a few hundred feet from the original site, the new globe was as close a reconstruction as could be achieved. The round, timber-framed structure echoed the scale and spirit of the first. The thatched roof, the first allowed in London since the Great Fire of 1666, was meticulously applied. The open yard once again welcomed standing spectators. The galleries were built without nails, using mortise and tenon joints. The stage extended into the crowd. The heavens above the stage were painted with stars and symbols. Even the flags were flown. Red for history, white for comedy, black for tragedy. When the first performance was held, appropriately Henry V, it was not just a play, it was a resurrection. Audiences wept. Actors bowed, not just to applause, but to legacy. London, after 350 years, had its globe again. But the new globe did more than echo the past. It reignited something in the present. The reconstructed theater became a place where old plays were seen anew, not through the lens of dusty textbooks, but in the air, in the sun, in the breath between lines. Audiences stood once again as groundlings, leaning close to catch the punchlines, dodging the occasional strayed raindrop, laughing and gasping as if they were there in 1601. And it wasn't just about Shakespeare. The Globe became a platform for experimental productions, for new voices, for global collaborations. It welcomed students, tourists, scholars, artists. It hosted the lectures, workshops, and festivals. It became a place where the boundaries between past and present blurred, where a 21st century teenager could hear Romeo and Juliet and feel, unmistakably, like the words were written for them. Sam Wanamaker's dream had been not just to recreate the building, but to rekindle the spirit, that electric, democratic, emotional fire that once burned in Bankside streets. He had succeeded. Today, the modern Globe stands as one of London's most beloved institutions. It is more than a theater. It is a living classroom, a tourist destination, a site of pilgrimage, a symbol of artistic defiance. It reminds the city and the world that stories endure, that imagination leaves fingerprints even centuries later, and that sometimes it takes a stranger from across the ocean to remind you how much you've forgotten and how much you can still reclaim. When the Globe Theatre reopened in 1997, it wasn't just a historical replica, it was a spark, not just in the hearts of actors and scholars, but in the city itself. London had gained not merely a building, but a bridge between past and present, between poetry and politics, between page and stage. And as the first modern audiences passed through its gates and stood once more in the open yard, gazing up at the tiers of carved wood, watching the actors call out lines that had once echoed through the same air centuries before, something clicked. This wasn't nostalgia, this was relevance. The Globe had returned not to look back, but to speak again, in the heart of one of the busiest cities in the world, surrounded by steel towers, commuter trains, cranes, and glass high-rises. This wooden O reminded everyone that London's soul was older, deeper, and more curious than its skyline suggested. And with that, the modern Globe took its place, not as a museum, but as a working engine of culture. A theater that teaches education was central to the Globe's mission from the start. Just beyond the theater stands the Sam Wanamaker Playhouse and the Globe's Education Center, where every year tens of thousands of students from local schools to international universities arrive to see, to hear, to feel Shakespeare. Here, Shakespeare is not homework. He is not a difficult voice from an alien time. He is real. Actors lead workshops where students try out iambic pentameter by walking to its beat. Teenagers rehearse scenes they once struggled to understand in class, only to find that when spoken aloud, the lines breathe. Teachers rediscover joy in the plays they thought they knew. The Globe doesn't just interpret Shakespeare, it restores him to the place he was always meant to be, in motion, in voice, in the messiness of real human bodies moving on stage, and it does so without dumbing him down. There's no need to rewrite Hamlet to make it interesting. You just have to perform him with truth. This approach has rippled across classrooms in London and beyond. English teachers bring students to the Globe and return to their schools transformed. Pupils, once convinced Shakespeare wasn't for them, suddenly find they know the rhythm of his thoughts. They laugh where they hadn't expected to laugh. They catch innuendo with delight. They understand grief, jealousy, longing, because those things haven't changed. Through the Globe, Shakespeare re-enters public life, not as a symbol of elite culture, but as a fellow citizen, a theater that welcomes everyone. One of the most beautiful features of the globe is also its simplest, the five-groundling ticket. For just £5, less than the cost of a sandwich in central London, anyone can stand in the yard, just as audiences did in 1600. It doesn't matter how much money you have or where you come from. You stand with everyone else. You lean against the stage. You duck when the actors swing swords. You get wet when it rains. And you're part of the show. This is radical in its own quiet way, at a time when theater tickets in the West End can cost hundreds, when opera houses still carry reputations of exclusivity. The Globe invites everyone, and that gesture, simple, consistent, generous, has changed the makeup of audiences. Here, you'll see tourists in shorts next to school, groups in uniforms. You'll see elderly Londoners who came as children, returning to stand once more. You'll see young couples, families, solo travelers, lifelong fans. It's a theater where you don't just watch, you participate. Actors at the Globe are trained to respond to the crowd. If the wind shifts, they adjust. If a plane passes overhead, they pause. If someone faints in the heat, the performance holds until help is given. The line between audience and actor blurs, and this too shapes London, reminding the city that art is a living contract between performer and public, a theater that challenges. While the Globe reveres tradition, it doesn't shy away from innovation. Over the years, the theater has staged bold reinterpretations of Shakespeare and new works inspired by his themes. Othello has been set in modern military barracks. The Tempest has featured all-female casts. Hamlet has been performed on tour in every country in the world. Part of the Globe 2 Globe project launched in 2014 to mark Shakespeare's 450th birthday. In these productions, the language remains, but the lens shifts. Directors bring new cultural perspectives. Actors of color reclaim roles once denied them. Gender fluid casting challenges the assumptions baked into centuries of performance. And the Globe holds space for these experiments without apology. It understands that Shakespeare doesn't need to be protected. He needs to be played with. And by doing so, the theater keeps him alive. Not fossilized, not polished, alive. This flexibility reflects a broader truth about London itself, that it is not one thing, but many, that it is layered, mixed, evolving, that its culture, like its population, is in constant conversation with the past and the upwest present. A theater that belongs to the city. Perhaps most movingly, the Globe has become a place of gathering, not just for the arts, but for the city. It hosts candlelit vigils. It offers refuge and reflection after tragedies. It opens for free performances, open-air film nights, community workshops. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the theater stood silent again, not by fire this time, but by virus. And yet, the Globe, responded. It launched free online streaming. It created teaching resources. It raised funds not just for survival, but for artists out of work. And when it reopened, tentatively, cautiously, the first performances were charged with emotion. Audiences returned wearing masks, spaced apart. But when the actors stepped on stage again, when the first line rang out across that open air, it was like an old friend exhaling. The globe had endured again, just as it had after the fire of 1613, just as it had after demolition in 1644, just as it had after Sam Wanamaker's death in 1993, because the globe isn't only wood and paint, it's a promise that theater, live, physical, communal, will always have a home in London, a culture shaped by a circle walk along Bankside today, and you'll see joggers, couples, school trips, office workers with takeaway coffees. You'll see the Shard looming in the distance, the Millennium Bridge stretching toward St. Paul's, and nestled among it all is this round, thatched building, quiet at dawn, bustling by afternoon, glowing in the golden hour before curtain. It doesn't shout, it doesn't dominate, but it radiates. The globe is part of the city's rhythm now, part of its texture, not just as a monument, but as a space that Londoners pass, enter, revisit. And even those who never step inside carry its influence, because every student who learns a line of Shakespeare, every actor who trains in verse, every writer who seeks the clarity of his prose, they carry the globe's legacy. It shaped how the city tells stories, how it understands power, love, betrayal, beauty, how it sees itself reflected in voices centuries old. When Shakespeare's Globe reopened its doors in 1997, its impact was felt most immediately on the streets of London, in classrooms, theaters, and riverside cafes, in the voices of actors and teachers, and in the delight of groundlings leaning in to hear familiar words spoken in fresh ways. But the ripple did not stop at the Thames. What began as a reconstruction became a resurrection, and from London's South Bank, the influence of the globe stretched outward, across oceans, into new languages, across genres, and deep into the fabric of global culture. It turns out that a round wooden theater, faithful to a 400-year-old blueprint, had something more modern theaters often lack: a universal heartbeat, a Shakespearean revival. Even before the globe was rebuilt, Shakespeare had long been considered the most widely performed playwright in the world. But after the globe reopened, something shifted. It wasn't just about the words anymore. It was about where and how those words were spoken. Audiences and artists who had only encountered Shakespeare in classrooms, in hardback books, on dusty blackboards, under the weary sighs of examiners, began to see him differently. Here was a space where the plays lived, where all the world's a stage wasn't just a metaphor, it was instruction. The globe reminded the world that Shakespeare was never meant to be read in silence. He was meant to be shouted, whispered, sung, cried, and danced. As a result, Shakespearean festivals around the world began experimenting with globe-style productions. Open-air stagings increased. Direct audience engagement, once avoided, became embraced. Bare stages and minimal props were no longer signs of budget limitations, but markers of authenticity. The globe became a model, not a relic, a world stage. The impact became most obvious with the launch of the Globe to Globe Festival in 2012. To coincide with the London Olympics, the Globe hosted 37 productions of Shakespeare's plays in 37 different languages, each by a different international company. Audiences watched The Merchant of Venice in Hebrew, The Tempest in Arabic, Twelfth Night in Hindi, King Lear in Belarusian. It was electric, not just for the linguistic variety, but for what each production brought from its own culture. Gestures, costumes, pacing, rhythm, and mythologies layered onto the bard's original scaffold. Some feared that the language barrier would dull the experience. It didn't. The globe's circular architecture, its open skies, its visible, physical style of acting, all these made the words feel secondary to the humanity. You didn't need to know the language to feel Hamlet's grief, or to laugh at Falstaff's bluster, or to be unsettled by Lady Macbeth's slow unraveling. It was a revelation, and it proved what Shakespeare himself likely always knew, that his stories, rooted in jealousy, ambition, love, fear, revenge, forgiveness, belonged to everyone, a catalyst for translation and adaptation. After Globe to Globe, a new wave of translations and adaptations surged, not just literal translations of the plays, but cultural translations. In Nigeria, Macbeth was set in a tribal chieftain's court. In South Korea, A Midsummer Night's Dream became a whimsical reflection of Seoul's social pressures. In Brazil, Othello was reimagined through the lens of race, poverty, and urban hierarchy. In India, Measure for Measure explored issues of caste and corruption. Each adaptation became both homage and interrogation. Not every theme fit neatly, not every line translated cleanly, but the effort mattered. And for each culture, Shakespeare became a mirror, not just of Elizabethan England, but of themselves. The Globe had once shown London to itself. Now it was helping the world see itself through borrowed words and familiar emotions. Shakespeare, in film and media, the Globe's revival didn't just affect theater, it sparked a shift in how Shakespeare was portrayed in film and television. Before the 2000s, Shakespeare on screen was often grand, theatrical, and sometimes inaccessible, overpronounced and visually stiff. But something changed as directors saw how alive and intimate the plays could be when performed simply. Films like Shakespeare in Love, 1998, romanticized the Globe's origins and won Oscars doing it. Baz Luhrmann's Romeo plus Juliet, 1996, had already introduced modern audiences to Shakespeare's poetry set against MTV-style editing. Later adaptations like Kenneth Branagh's Much Ado About Nothing, Julie Taymor's Titus, and even teen films like 10 Things I Hate About You and She's the Man reimagined the plays for new eyes. But behind many of these lay a common influence, the knowledge that Shakespeare performed well, didn't need ornate sets or heavy solemnity. He needed honesty, emotion, breath. This mindset was nurtured in the Globe, and it made its way onto screens. Today, young actors who cut their teeth performing on the Globe's stage in period tights under sun and rain carry that energy into Hollywood, and audiences, knowingly or not, reap the rewards. A new language of storytelling. More subtly, the Globe has shaped how we tell stories. The direct address, where characters speak to the audience, is now common in modern theater and TV. Fleabag, House of Cards, The Office. This breaking of the fourth wall, once rare, is now a beloved device, and Shakespeare did it first. At the Globe, direct address isn't a technique, it's tradition. Actors learn to treat the audience not as watchers, but as scene partners. The audience doesn't observe Hamlet. They are his conscience. They don't witness Macbeth's descent. They enable it. This mindset has spilled outward. Writers, directors, even marketers now talk about audience engagement as central to storytelling. And quietly, the Globe helped pioneer that. A cultural ambassador, the Globe has also become a symbol of London in the global imagination. Postcards, guidebooks, and travel shows place it alongside Big Ben and the Tower Bridge. It's a photo stop, a wedding venue, a lecture hall, a pilgrimage site for English teachers and students. For tourists, the Globe is a chance to touch London's literary soul. For locals, it's a reminder that their city's history isn't locked behind glass. It's walkable, touchable, spoken. Few other cities offer that. The Eiffel Tower is grand, but you can't climb it and shout poetry. The Colosseum is ancient, but its games are long over. The Globe? You can still stand inside it. You can still hear Juliet's voice where it first echoed. You can still weep for Lear under the same open sky. A legacy still unfolding. What Sam Wanamaker began as an act of devotion has become an act of cultural diplomacy. The Globe connects people not just to Shakespeare, but to the possibility of theater as a way of seeing each other more clearly. It tells the world art doesn't need perfection. It needs participation. It needs sweat and voice and space. It needs a place to stand and be heard. And from London, just as it did 400 years ago, the Globe whispers outward, here is a story. Will you listen? London is a city of layers. Roman ruins lie beneath office blocks. Tudor beams hide behind glass facades. New train lines are dug under medieval streets. Time folds here, quietly, into architecture, language, even daily habits, and nestled along the south bank of the Thames, Shakespeare's Globe Theatre has become more than just a revival. It is now part of London's identity, not because it is the city's oldest building. It isn't. Not because it's the largest. It's far from that. But because it captures the spirit of London like few other places do, a mix of rebellion and refinement, a space where voices from every class, culture, and corner of the world come together to hear old words made new, a place where the past isn't preserved in silence, but shouted, wept, whispered, and laughed back to life. Architectural echoes and city planning, the Globe didn't just bring theater back to Bankside, it reshaped it. Before the theater opened, the area was still in transition. Post-war rebuilding had left stretches of the South Bank raw and uneven. Tourism clustered on the north side, Westminster, Covent Garden, the British Museum. But when the Globe arrived, it drew attention and foot traffic back across the river. Soon after, the Millennium Bridge was constructed, linking St. Paul's Cathedral to the Tate Modern, and just a short walk beyond, the Globe. The bridge itself became a symbolic connector between tradition and experimentation, between the financial district and the artistic heart. Urban planners began treating the South Bank not just as an overflow zone, but as a destination in its own right. New pedestrian paths, street lighting, signage, and riverfront renovations followed. The Globe's success proved that people would come, not just for shopping or dining, but for story. And the city responded. Today, Bankside is a blend of old and new. Cafes overlook cobbled alleys. Apartments rise behind centuries-old pubs. And the Globe, with its thatched roof and timber ribs, sits calmly amid it all, reminding everyone what came before. The Globe and the London arts scene. The Globe has also had a subtle but steady influence on London's broader artistic scene. Theaters across the city, from fringe spaces to major houses, have drawn inspiration from its openness, its intimacy, and its commitment to accessibility. You'll now find more venues experimenting with open-air spaces, site-specific shows, and dynamic actor-audience interaction. Companies like Shakespeare's Rose Theatre, the Regent's Park Open Air Theatre, and pop-up venues in East London all owe a quiet debt to the Globe's enduring popularity. But it's not just performance technique, it's ethos. The Globe's model of affordable ticketing, educational outreach, and public engagement has reminded London's institutions that theater is not just a luxury good. It's a public service. It's community building. It's conversation. Even the West End, long known for its polished musicals and commercial hits, has embraced more Shakespeare, more physical staging, and more stripped-down productions. Audiences now expect depth. They expect engagement, and they know, thanks to the Globe, that brilliance doesn't require chandeliers. or velvet. It requires voice and truth and space, theater and tourism, a cultural economy it's impossible to ignore. The globe's economic influence on the city. Each year, the theater attracts hundreds of thousands of visitors, many of whom would not otherwise explore the South Bank. Its draw extends beyond the stage. The tours, exhibitions, shop, and riverside cafe all contribute to London's vibrant cultural economy. But more than revenue, the Globe brings a particular quality of tourism. It attracts the curious, the literate, the dreamers and wanderers. It draws students on field trips, backpackers with cameras, elderly couples who've waited years to visit. And because it is living theater, not a frozen museum, the experience changes day by day, season by season. There is no standard visit. No two shows are the same. Rain makes one performance intimate. Sunshine makes another jubilant. Crowds shape the mood. Language shifts the tone. And tourists carry those moments home. Not just photos, but memory. They speak about the globe the way one might speak of a sacred place, not because it demands reverence, but because it invites wonder. This has influenced how London promotes itself. In brochures and travel ads, the globe often appears alongside Buckingham Palace and the London Eye. It's one of the few attractions that is both ancient and new, a place where history is performed, not simply displayed. Community and civic engagement. The Globe doesn't just serve tourists and actors, it serves Londoners. Through outreach programs, subsidized tickets, free performances, and local partnerships, the theater weaves itself into the city's everyday life. Local schools bring pupils for workshops and matinees. Community groups use the space for poetry, slams, open mics, and storytelling events during times of grief, such as the London Bridge attacks or the Grenfell tragedy. The Globe has hosted vigils and quiet gatherings. Its openness gives it moral weight. It is not surrounded by fences. It is not locked behind exclusive memberships. It is a public place, built on private dreams, returned to the people, and London, in turn, has claimed it. The Globe in Daily London. Life, ask a Londoner about the Globe, and you'll get varied responses. Oh, I took my daughter there for her first play. We go every summer. It's a tradition now. I was in a workshop there in college. I stood in the yard once, and the actor looked right at me during the monologue. It's part of the rhythm now. A place you walk past on the way to Borough Market. A detour you make when friends visit from abroad. A memory you didn't expect to keep. Even those who don't attend performances know its silhouette. They know the white plaster, the brown beams, the sloped roof. They know the voice of the actors echoing down the street. They hear the trumpet and smile. It has become, like the red bus or the black cab, a shorthand for the city's character, rooted, resilient, spoken, a cultural compass, perhaps what makes the Globe Most powerful is not what it is, but what it points to. It reminds London of its literary inheritance, not as a weight, but as a gift. It reminds citizens that art should be public, that stories belong to everyone, that a stage, however old, is always ready for new voices. It has taught London to look backward with curiosity and forward with courage. And as the city continues to grow, upward, outward, digitally, globally, the globe stays still, round, open, unfinished, waiting for the next voice. There are buildings in London that dazzle with grandeur, and then there are those that stay with you, not because of how they look, but because of how they make you feel. The Globe Theater is one of those. To many, it is not just a performance venue, it is a space of return, of emotion, of memory, not of what happened on stage alone, but of what was happening inside you when you were there. Unlike a grand opera house or a museum behind velvet ropes, the Globe doesn't place itself above you. It meets you where you are. It invites you to lean in, stand close, and feel not just the words of Shakespeare, but your own heartbeat in the echo of his lines. And it's in this quiet generosity that the Globe becomes more than historic. It becomes personal. The first time, for many, their first visit to the Globe is unforgettable. Maybe it's a school trip where the teacher has been reciting Macbeth in class and suddenly, here's the very place it would have been performed. Maybe it's a parent bringing a curious child, unsure if the afternoon will hold their attention. Maybe it's a tourist accidentally stumbling upon the round theater along the Thames, drawn in by curiosity and a $5 ticket. Whoever they are, the moment they step into the yard or look up at the carved wooden galleries above, something shifts. It's not loud, it's not showy, it's something felt. The air seems fuller, the light more golden, even the sound of birds overhead feels like it belongs to the story. And when the actors arrive, not from behind a curtain, but walking through the same gates you just entered, the barrier disappears. It doesn't feel like watching, it feels like joining. And that first moment of realizing you're not just in the audience, but in the world of the play, lingers long after. Rituals of return. The Globe has become a place of return for many. Some come every year to mark an anniversary. Some make it part of their travel every time they're in the city. Others, Londoners who live nearby, visit like they might a park or a familiar cafe. It's not just the plays. It's the feeling of stepping into something that remembers you, even if it cannot speak your name. Some people return for comfort, after loss, after endings, after too many days of noise. They stand in the yard, feel the wind shift, hear a familiar line. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and they breathe easier. Others return for joy. They bring new partners, introduce children, replay memories. I saw this play here when I was your age. This is where your dad and I had our first date. This is the first place I saw real theater. The Globe becomes a holder of personal milestones, tucked quietly among the public ones. And unlike many spaces in the city, it doesn't rush you. It doesn't ask you to move along. It lets you be. The healing space. There is something about theater, and the globe in particular, that makes space for grief. Maybe it's the honesty of the performances. Maybe it's the history of a building, born from fire, silence, and revival. Maybe it's the way actors often look right at you when they speak. But many people have stood in the globe and cried, not always for the play, but because something inside them opened. A widow hearing, give sorrow words. The grief that does not speak knits up the o'erwrought heart. A student hearing, there is a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. A friend hearing, we few, we happy few, we band of brothers. These lines, first written for drama, land like balm, and in the globe's circular shape, where no one is more than a few meters from the action, you're never alone in those feelings. There is always someone laughing nearby, someone wiping their eyes, someone holding their breath. It's a reminder that even in a city as vast as London, you can feel together love and light. The globe is also a place of love. Proposals have happened there, quiet, simple, often with a nervous whisper. During intermission, or as the lights dim, couples return to the same bench where they once first held hands. Families pose for photos under the carved beams. Friends hug outside the gate after seeing a play that surprised them. And sometimes the theater becomes part of love in a broader sense. Love of language, of ritual, of connection. People who never liked Shakespeare find themselves laughing at Twelfth Night. Tourists who didn't plan to stay long find they don't want to leave. Strangers strike up conversations while standing shoulder to shoulder in the yard. There's a lightness to it all, not forced joy, but the lightness that comes from being welcomed, truly welcomed. The globe doesn't ask you to dress up. It doesn't mind if you've never read the play. It simply says, come in, stand with us. Let's see where the story takes you. Letters and legacies. Over the years, the globe has received countless letters. Folded notes left by benches, messages slipped to ushers, formal thank yous mailed from faraway places. Some are from students who say, this is where I learned to love words. Some are from teachers who write, this changed how I teach. Others are from elders who say, I never thought I'd feel this alive again. These letters are kept, remembered, occasionally shared in quiet corners of the globe's exhibitions. They are evidence that the theater's impact is not just cultural, but intimate. It doesn't just shape stories, it shapes lives. The architecture of belonging even. The globe's physical design plays into this emotional resonance. Its circular shape doesn't allow for hierarchy. There's no best seat that renders others irrelevant. There's no curtain to hide behind. The space itself insists on community, and the open roof, it invites the sky to participate. Sometimes a bird flies over during a monologue. Sometimes rain taps the wood during a soliloquy. Sometimes a plane passes overhead, and the actor pauses, smiles, folds it into the moment, and though it's evolved across time, it carries traces of Shakespeare's own comic genius. Go into a pub near the South Bank, and you'll hear banter layered in sarcasm, puns, wordplay, the same devices used by Festa, Falstaff, or Mercutio, modern. Londoners don't necessarily see themselves as poets, but they often play with language the way Shakespeare did. Rhythm matters, timing matters. A well-timed pun gets applause. A double entendre earns a round. It's a tradition born from stages like the Globe, where the crowd demanded both meaning and mischief. And just like back then, humor in London is a public sport, a dialogue, not a monologue. The Globe's influence on listening theater taught London not only how to speak, but how to listen. In the Globe, audiences were active. They shouted back. They reacted. They learned to hear layers. A speech might mean one thing to a noble, another to a servant. Today, that multi-layered listening is still part of London's culture. Londoners have a gift for hearing irony, reading between lines, catching subtext. It's why the city thrives on satire. Why so many of its best comedians are writers first. Why its spoken word scene is so rich. Why its politics is often performed like theater. Because people here are trained, not in school, but in city life, to hear more than what's said. And that, too, began in the theater, at the Globe. The emotional shapes of a city London is not a city that always shows its heart. It's busy. It's guarded. It keeps its feelings folded under coats and umbrellas. But when the right words come, a line from King Lear, a cry from Othello, a joke from As You Like It, the heart opens. The Globe gave London permission to feel big feelings in public, to laugh loudly, to cry silently, to see their grief reflected, to watch power rise and fall, and know deeply that all of it is human. That kind of emotional literacy doesn't fade. It seeps into how a city handles change, loss, celebration. It becomes part of its emotional weather, where poetry and pavement meet. Walk from Borough Market to the Millennium Bridge. Look left, down to the Thames. You'll see the Globe, half in shadow, half in light. Around you, school children on field trips, actors on lunch break, tourists taking selfies, someone reading Hamlet on a bench. Above, the low hum of planes. Below, the rush of trains underground. And beside it all, the Globe, calm, round, constant. It's more than a theater. It's a fountain, quietly spilling language into the city. Every performance sends words back into circulation. Every student who quotes a line adds it to the air. Every argument, every confession, every toast at a wedding that begins with, "Shall I compare thee?" owes something to this wooden ring. The Globe didn't just shape London's theater, it shaped how London feels, how it speaks, how it listens, how it mourns, how it jokes, how it holds itself together. Some places in a city are grand by design, others become sacred through ritual. You don't need to go inside the globe to feel what it means to London. Just stand near it. Listen to the murmur of people gathering. Watch the groundlings queue, a slow, relaxed choreography of strangers becoming an audience. Notice the way first-time visitors whisper as they cross the threshold, as if entering a place that expects reverence but offers welcome instead. The globe has become part of the city's unspoken ritual calendar. It marks the seasons. It shapes the rhythm of an afternoon. It offers not escape, but return to a place where story and silence, voice and vulnerability are held in equal respect. It is a ritual of belonging, and it belongs to the city. The walk to the globe, it starts before the show. The walk, maybe you come across London Bridge, maybe you emerge from the Warren of Borough Market, maybe you ride a train to Blackfriars and follow the curve of the Thames. Whichever way you come, there's a change in the air as you approach Bankside. The river opens up. The streets slow down. You pass people moving in the same direction, not commuters, but participants, holding tickets, carrying curiosity, talking in low tones. You might not know it, but you're entering something older than any script. The ritual of arrival. Londoners have done this for centuries. They crossed bridges, ferried over the Thames, walked muddy paths to reach the place where stories were told. Not because they needed a lesson, but because they needed presence, to gather, to witness, to remember they were part of something larger. And that ritual, even in 2025, remains intact. The gathering before curtain. There's something magical in the moments just before the play begins. The yard fills, the light shifts, phones are tucked away, the buzz turns from chatter to hush. Even if you've never seen a Shakespeare play before, even if you don't know the plot, something inside you knows this matters. It's not because the actors are famous, not because the script is old. It's because the space insists on meaning. You stand under the same sky as they did in 1600. You feel the breath of the person beside you. You hear the creak of the wood, the flap of the flag overhead. And when the actor walks on stage and begins to speak, there it is, the ancient present, and everyone is suddenly very, very still. The pause of the city for the next 2 hours. Something rare happens. London pauses, not all of it. The buses still run, the sirens still sound, the pigeons still dart overhead. But your London, the one inside this round frame, becomes timeless. You forget the news. You forget your inbox. You forget your role, your worries, your pace. You are simply here, with words that reach across centuries, with people you don't know, but who are for now your community, with actors who might sweat, forget lines, cry, improvise, and in doing so, remind you that art is alive. The globe doesn't offer spectacle, it offers encounter. And in a city as busy as London, that is radical. Rain, laughter, and the unexpected part of the globe's ritual is letting go of control. It might rain, a pigeon might fly through the yard, an actor might leap off the stage, turn to the audience, and deliver a punchline inches from your face. You cannot curate the experience. You simply experience it. For many Londoners, this becomes a kind of spiritual practice, leaning into unpredictability, learning to be with what is. And over time, the globe teaches a particular kind of wisdom that stories don't need perfection, they need presence. That beauty doesn't come from polish, it comes from honesty. That emotion doesn't ask permission, it arrives when the space is safe enough. Leaving the globe changed when the show ends and the applause fades and you step back onto the London pavement. Something is different, not dramatically, not like thunder, but like an aftertaste that lingers. You walk differently. You listen more closely to conversation. You might speak a little slower, hold someone's gaze a little longer, carry a line in your head for days. It could be a tragic ending, or a comic twist, or a single phrase that pierced something in you, but you carry it because the globe, whether you knew it or not, gave you permission to feel. And that is not something a city gives lightly. A city's emotional pulse theater, especially in the round, does something city planners can't design. It connects the emotional architecture of a place. The globe reminds London that it's more than a collection of zones and boroughs. It is a place where people gather to mean something to each other, where silence is shared, where laughter rolls in waves, where stories return again and again to shape how we love, lose, mourn, and hope. The globe is not the only theater in London, but it is the pulse that keeps the rest beating in rhythm. Weddings, ashes, and homecomings, it's worth noting how many people have chosen the globe for major life moments. Some get married here, under the thatched roof, surrounded by sonnets. Others scatter ashes, placing part of a life inside the space that gave it shape. Actors return after decades away. Visitors come back after 20 years, just to stand in the yard again. It's not fandom, it's homecoming, and every city needs those. Places where you remember who you are, not in flash, but in stillness. The globe is that stillness. It's the soft breath between acts, the pause before the first line, the memory that waits until you're ready to feel it. If you were to draw a single symbol for London, one that held its history, its contradictions, its endurance, it wouldn't be a crown or a skyscraper or a bridge. It would be a circle, a wooden circle, open to the sky, not gilded, not gleaming, but worn smooth by footsteps, held up by beams, echoing with voices. The globe, because the globe is more than a theater. It is a shape the city returns to, a promise it renews, a rhythm it remembers. It has burned. It has been banned, it has been rebuilt, and each time it has come back because the need for stories, real stories, spoken stories, shared in the same breath stories, does not die. A circle of survival. Think of what the globe has endured. The flames of 1613, the Puritan closures of 1642, centuries of forgetting, then war, urban change, bureaucracy, disbelief. And yet, here it is. The circle holds. In a world of square screens, noise, endless data, and rush, the globe is a rare space where time stretches, where eyes meet across distance, where words echo, where silence is not awkward, but sacred. It stands not in defiance of the future, but in dialogue with it. And that's what makes it a true symbol of London, because London, too, is always being rewritten, burned, rebuilt, contested, surprising, but somehow it keeps its shape, not geographically, not politically, but emotionally. The shape is this: we gather, we tell stories, we go on, a place where the human endures. The globe reminds us of something deep, something often buried under modern life, that human beings are meaning makers, that we need to see ourselves in others, that language isn't luxury, it's survival, that we are at our most alive when we speak and are heard. It doesn't matter if the play is tragic or comic, old or new. What matters is that we stood or sat and let ourselves feel. That's where culture begins, not in rules or heritage or prestige, but in experience. And the globe offers that experience every single day. A circular room, a shared breath, a story, a mirror for the city. In this series, we've walked through the globe's history, from the muddy bankside of the 1590s to the post-pandemic city of now. And in every age, the globe has been a mirror, not a perfect one, but a useful one. It showed Elizabethans what it meant to fear power. It showed Victorians how language could lift a nation. It showed a post-war world how art could be rebuilt. It shows us today how tradition and progress are not enemies, but partners. And perhaps that's what London loves most about the globe, that it changes without losing itself. Just like the city, the globe as an act of faith. In many ways, the globe is an act of faith, not in religion, but in people, faith that strangers will gather, that actors we will be brave, that language will still carry truth, that emotion is not weakness, that art will still matter. Sam Wanamaker, an outsider, believed in that faith, and generations before him, a group of actors did too, disassembling a theater in the dead of night, carrying beams across the frozen Thames. That's not just logistics, that's devotion. And it's why the globe continues to hold cultural weight, because behind its structure is sacrifice, and behind its survival is belief. What the globe offers, the world to the world. The globe is a reminder that stories are stronger than politics. Memory is stronger than architecture. Imagination is a renewable resource. Simplicity can be profound. A wooden stage can still hold the entire human heart. Tourists take selfies with it. Writers draw from it. Teachers cite it. Actors long to perform on it. Children remember it long after the script fades. It is, quietly, one of London's greatest gifts to the world because it says, here, this is who we were, and maybe who we still are. The final line. So what does the globe mean to London? It means that theater is not a luxury, but a necessity. That feeling together is revolutionary. That to speak and be heard, especially in a circle, is a kind of healing. That history isn't locked in the past. It's performed again and again. The globe is not perfect. It was never meant to be. It is a stage, a scaffold, a circle of chance. But in it, London sees itself, messy, brilliant, enduring, human. And when the actor walks forward and says, if we shadows have offended, or now is the winter of our discontent, or the play's the thing, you hear more than a line. You hear a city speaking, you hear London, you hear us, and the circle holds. Good night,